Plain Truth, the show where we go into some of the mysteries, anomalies, and the dirty underbelly of the world around us. I'm your host, Paul. Joining us this week, we have Jay Weidner, who is quite well known for his work on the question of whether Stanley Kubrick helped create that amazing Apollo video that we saw. Sorry about this, but there were many cases of problems, delays in Skype that caused pauses or us talking over each other. We edited them out as best we could. Not too many left. But anyway, apologies about that. Jay, are you there?
I am.
Thanks much for coming. I appreciate it.
Thanks for inviting
how you
me.
been? I heard you got a new video out. I'm looking forward to it, but I admit that I haven't seen it yet.
Yeah, my new movie. It's a feature film. It's my second feature film, actually. The Last Avatar is now out on Vimeo. I'm releasing it myself independently after I was tracked down by two different very well-known distributing companies. But in the end, I realized that the playing field is pretty much level today for everyone who's releasing a film, unless it's based on a comic book or a bestseller or whatever. So I released it myself, and any help I can get from anyone out there to try to make this a success, because if I can make this film a success, then I can prove that other films like this, which are really films about the awakening, can be made. And sort of like the reason that there became so many science fiction movies after 1977 was because Star Wars was such a big hit, and everybody threw their money behind science fiction. We got all these really great movies like Alien and Aliens and all these other great movies that came out after Star Wars. Well, I'm trying to get the same thing going here. So if you want to see the movie, I think you're going to like it. If you're a member of this audience, it's very much tailor-made for that. And you can go to thelastavatarmovie.com and click through the everything there, and you can even watch it from there. Or if you just want to watch it right away, you can go to watch.thelastavatarmovie.com. And, let me know what you think.
Well, you say it's about the awakening, and I heard you talking about this somewhere, and basically the idea is that kind of the veil is lifting.
Yeah, I think it's the first movie out the gate that's absolutely open about it. There's a lot of movies that are, jumping around it a little bit. Even the new Star Wars movie seems to be using some of the awakened language in it. Wouldn't surprise me. J.J. Abrams is a fan of mine, but the awakening is now pervasive, and so much to the point where the establishment is just completely freaking out. And I think there's one nail in the coffin like once a week now, and but it's going to be a huge struggle. The awakening is only the first part. Then we have to concretize the awakening, and that's going to be the hard part, because there's mafias and syndicates and old boy networks. They're so entrenched in every aspect of society that it's going to be really, really hard to extract them. They're in everything. I could go on and on about how they're inside every single aspect, and trying to just change simple things because you have a better idea is almost impossible, because these old boy mafia networks come in and squash these old ideas, these new ideas, so that they don't stop the old ideas that are making them a lot of money. And I'm not just talking about oil. I'm talking about everything.
Everything. Hey, Jay.
Food, everything.
Jay, everything,'s a syndicate. Do you remember Kurt Vonnegut?
Oh, he's one of my favorite authors.
At the end of his life, he gave a commencement speech or something. Anyway, a speech at some university. And he said his advice to young people, was to join a gang.
Yes, I saw that.
You remember that? Because the world is run by these syndicates, right?
Yep.
There's the Bush syndicate, or there's the Rockefeller syndicate. There are all these syndicates.
Yeah, and they're many times conflicting. But they've decided sometime after World War II, they decided to kind of placate the warring factions, or a singular, this is what I think, a singular mob took over the top part of the pyramid and began to enforce its will on the mobs below them. They would say things like, okay, you can keep your concrete business and your construction business, but when you see what I'm doing over here, you have to remain silent. And I think that's kind of what happened after that. The mob wars went away after a while. By the late 60s, they were gone. And I believe it was about the late 60s that this singular mob, which I believe was centered in Chicago, finally took over. And they were working with intelligence agencies too, so it was a coordinated effort. I'm pretty clear on this now that by the mid 60s they had taken over about 40 to 50% of politics, about 30% of science. They hadn't quite started on education. That wouldn't happen until the 70s, and the entertainment business would not be completely taken over until the 80s, the early 80s. And and you can kind of, if you follow back through the record, you can kind of see their fingerprints all over everything as their power became more pervasive. And it's quite a brilliant approach that they took. They took over our culture first. Then, after they took over the culture, and they played it so that they looked like they were the friends of the present culture, but really they were very cleverly subordinating that culture with another culture. But this other culture is not defined, is not really anything but an anti the other culture. And my cat in the background is agreeing with me. And so it's very interesting to watch it. And so
Maybe
I was in Hollywood in the late 70s, and I saw the takeover, right? And it was one of the reasons I left Hollywood in the mid-'80s. It was because you couldn't get a movie made anymore that you wanted to get made. They'd come in, they saw the freedom that was going on in the 70s, and the clampdown came, in the early 80s. And then after that, movies just became these big, bombastic, action-packed, kind of
mindless. Yeah.
Yeah,
Hey, Jay.
Yes.
I think it's been a great thing that we finally got a president from Chicago, because I thought that was the real progress for America. Is we finally became honest enough to admit that we're run by the mob.
Well, it's true. A great book on that, by the way, which has not been really very well read by anybody, but it is really a good book. It's called Super Mob. And I'm going to forget the guy's name now. Gus Russo wrote it, and hardly anybody has bought the book because it's been squashed by the major media. Even Gus, who I've talked to, has told me how surprised he was by how this book was squashed. But it is down to the detail of how they took over Chicago and how they took over America. They moved from Chicago to Los Angeles and took over the entertainment industry. And it's just fascinating, especially the close ties that they have to intelligence. Which is really the fascinating part, because the mobs merged with intelligence in the 50s with Meyer Lansky, and it's a fascinating. I could write a whole book on it. I'm really fascinated by the whole subject. But my movie, The Last Avatar, actually is the anti-Hollywood film. In other words, it's made like a Hollywood film. It's got good production values, good acting, good music and cinematography and sets and all that, but it's the anti-Hollywood in that it is actually identifying who's doing what and why and how we get out of it, which is what I think is so important about the movie, and why I wanted to get into an entertainment way, what we're all talking about, but I wanted to put it in a level where the average Joe and Joan could figure it out. Zen Gardner gave it a really raving review, and New Dawn magazine in Australia gave it a incredibly great review. So I'm really grateful.
That's a very good magazine, by the way.
It is my favorite magazine. So I was really glad that they gave the movie a good review.
Got a question for you then. A lot of people have been talking about how the bad guys are basically going to externalize the hierarchy. Right? They're going to tell us what they're doing. Stuff they used to hide, they'll now do in plain sight. Do you, generally speaking, agree with that thesis?
Yeah, I think the Internet's making it that way. I think also the collapsing economies are driving whistleblowers out into the open as they lose their jobs. And I think that's happening a lot. And I have a lot of insiders that I talk to, and I can see that there's this slow disclosure of things going on. But here's the thing, the mafias are so entrenched that they could even release a free energy device today and say, here's this this machine the size of a shoebox that can run New York City for infinity. And I've heard that this is exactly what they have, right? Using 0-point energy. but how do you get the Department of Power in New York City to agree to shut down and release everybody, all their employees, because they no longer need them? How do you induce them to take down all the power lines and remove all that ugly crap, the power centers and everything? And the unions, the mafias, the construction mafias, they're all so entrenched that okay, wow, we're enlightened, but how do we go from the enlightened to enactment? And that, I'm looking at that right now, and I'm really seeing how really difficult this is going to be. And it kind of worries me, because I didn't think it was everywhere and as pervasive as it is, but it is. It's down to trying to change the way that you pour concrete. You can't do it. There's many new ways of making buildings, which are incredibly cheap, making incredibly advanced products that literally cost nothing. It's just made out of regular dirt that is harder than any kind of concrete, but the concrete mafias will not let it, and they crush everybody down. Eric Dollard is a scientist who worked on free energy, and he had a company in California, and he had invented the device that was doing it. He was an incredible genius, and he's living out of his car in Joshua Tree now for the last 3 years, because they came in and destroyed his whole life. And he didn't do anything but just trying to be an altruistic scientist. And so I'm seeing this, and I'm going, okay, now we got to get to the next level here. What is the next level? How do we, stop these mafias who are controlling the city councils and all the HOAs and all the people that approve buildings in every city? You can't get anything approved. You can't get anything done. And and they're starting to close down in the country. If you're living out in the middle of the country and you're trying to get off the grid and you're using all these new ideas and new materials, now they're starting to come down on you and arrest you. And it is clear that the mobs are behind the whole entire thing, and that. So we now see who is behind it, and now we have to figure out how to get rid of them without a lot of trouble. And that I have not figured out.
Well, my bet, I hope I'm wrong, but my bet is that the U.S. just won't be up for it. It'll have to come out of Asia or somewhere else.
Yeah. That's probably
because
true,
there's just they don't have they have different entrenched mafias, and I just think anyway that there's a season for everything. And
the thing is, in China, it looks to me like the entrenched mafias, especially the construction mafias, actually built entire cities financed by the Chinese government that nobody can live in and nobody can afford to live in. And that tells me that the construction mobs in China are in complete control. Forcing them to build stuff they don't even need.
Yeah, but sure, I wouldn't. There's no question that they have all kinds of mobs, but I would just say, for example, you mentioned Eric Dollard, who's just a really important figure people should look at, and then he was with the whole crowd back in the 80s or whatever. Do you remember some of the people? Well, not just free energy. They were looking into all kinds of very interesting things, like Trevor James Constable.
And all sorts of incredible things.
All kinds of great stuff. And anyway, on my show, I've had Mark Dancy on a couple times, who I recommend you look into. He's an Australian living in the Philippines, but he's lived around the world, including the U.S. And his business is basically, getting investors funding and getting through the whole legal processes in different countries for new and better energy. And he started out hoping for what you'll call free energy, but he's gradually come around to the fact that now all over Earth, but especially in Asia, they are building, developing, and deploying all kinds of better energies. 30% performance, 30% better here, 20% better here. And basically Asia's got the money and they're willing to do it. They just want to save money on energy. And so that kind of thing, yeah, go ahead. No,
I agree with that. I know several people that are also doing that here in the United States, and they're able to skirt around the mafias doing that. The Elio Carr, which is out of Louisiana, he skirted, the owner of that, whom I know, has skirted all of the laws cleverly beyond belief to create a car that can get 80 miles to the gallon, right? and it does get 80 miles, and it can hit 100 miles an hour. So it's not, a weak little. It's a gasoline-bearing car, though, still, which actually is probably safer than an electric car, by the way, because you don't want to sit in a car with all those electromagnetic fields from all those batteries. Just not very healthy. But anyway, so these mafias are there. But again, you're right. Just like my movie, there are outside interests who can use technologies to upend the establishment. And I did it with my movie, and I had to spend all my own money. And I'm afraid that these guys with all these devices and everything, maybe that's what they're going to have to do, is work a job and then spend 8 hours a day on their devices. And not look for people to donate money to them and give money to them and invest in them, because maybe that's just not going to work anymore. And you're right. I'm sure that there's small Asian countries that are finding ways around these things. But what we have to do is demand that the powers that be release about 50 or 60 years of technology that they've suppressed and kept from us. And I believe that all liberation for the entire human race lies in that one act. If we can get them to cough it up, then I think we're going to see, because the rumors I'm hearing is that they've got stuff that is absolutely astonishing.
Well, I've heard that too. But my point, though, was if Asia, whatever, broadly speaking, India, China, Indonesia, whatever, if they start releasing stuff or discovering stuff on their own, that will pretty much force the West or whoever, the American military-industrial complex, to loosen its grip. They won't have a choice.
Well, I think there's a lot of interest in the world right now that would like to see that happen. China and Putin, I think would like to see that happen. I've heard also that they finally unencrypted the entire Snowden documents finally in the last few months. And there's quite a few revelations in there, which Putin is going to leak out slowly. I think you're going to see a slow leak of information from not only Putin and China, but also within the U.S. There's factions within the U.S. that are tired of what's going on and know the truth, because they talk to me. And they're going to start coming out in a kind of a steady release. It's already happening. NASA, I've heard that I heard like 40 years ago, not me 40 years ago, but that 40 years ago, NASA had invented a propulsion device that was electromagnetic in nature that could get them all over the place really fast. And they just announced 2 weeks ago that they had this device. So they're starting to come. They're starting to come forth and talk about it. And if you watch and read, you'll see there's this slow drip, drip, drip of information being released.
And Jay, let's not forget that the system is not working. The current system is not working for people as well as it used to, right? So talking about Chicago, so I know someone who's from there and had family in the boys, so to speak, and then the Vegas crowd. And it used to be everybody got a taste, as they would say, right?
Yep. Now it's moved up to the top.
There ain't no taste unless your last name is, Wynn, as in Steve Wynn.
Yep.
Right?
Yep.
And it's all gone corporate and, like you said, intelligence agency, oriented. And, the guy who used to be just a bouncer, fixer, a guy who handled the money wash at the end of the day, whatever, all the kind of things that we used to know and love in the mafia or Vegas or the bookies around Chicago, whatever, corrupt cops. All that stuff's gone now. They want to privatize it all. They don't want cops to get any corrupt money. Nobody's to get anything except the people at the top.
Yeah, and if you actually look at the trajectory of this whole thing, you can see that it was all pre-planned. That they were doing it, in steps, one step at a time. Kind of a friendly step was the first step. Oh, we're not really going to, hurt you. We're just here, and we're just businessmen. And then the next step is, well, here, I know you see us doing a lot of wrong, but here's $100, your wife needs money and blah, blah, blah. Then pretty soon, it's full out in the open. We are here. We are dictators. You are scum. We are going to take over. We're going to federalize the police. We're going to corporatize everything. And furthermore, if you're forward-thinking people and you see all this coming and you go out and you try to create alternative communities out in the country, they're already targeting you. It's astonishing how ahead of the game they've gotten. They've really. I have a house in an alternative community, and they're already beginning to Agenda 21 target the community, which has got 90 people in it. It's out in the middle of nowhere. And you're like, don't you guys have something better to do than come in here in this community where we don't want you? And come in and start, offering all your federal money to us so that we all have to succumb to everything that you want. And so it's happening everywhere. And this is what
it's practically like the Archon theory. There's a spiritual mental virus that's taken over because it can't be the money. You know what I mean? It's like they'll spend more money to go out to your community than they'll ever make. It's just they can't leave you alone. It's they just can't.
No, they can't, and they won't. It's now clear and obvious that no matter where we go, they're coming. I mean, it's only a matter of time. So you can move to, some remote place in South America and think that you're safe, you will be safe for a short while, but they're coming. And, I tell liberals who, they get so upset at me because I won't support their gun control laws. And so I tell them, I say, you're going to get rid of your guns and you're going to be thinking that the world's a really great place. But you know what? There's going to be a knock on your door one day, too. And you're not going to have any ways to defend yourself. If you think a knife's going to help you, it's not. Not that a gun's going to help you against these guys with their high-powered weapons anyway, and drones and everything else they've got. So it doesn't, I don't know. I'm not in a real great place outside of my movie being released, hoping that we can have a spiritual revolution against these guys because they're really putting the clamp down here lately.
Yeah. Well, but maybe getting to the broader theme of kind of an awakening, I thought maybe today we could go a bit into, I don't know if you want to call it revisiting things we used to know, or maybe you can call it like looking at the alternative to the alternative. And so, how about I put it this way? You have a website, right?
Yep.
Is it hosted by Time Warner?
No.
No, okay. Because you see, that's what alternative websites tend to be.
No.
You know what I mean? There's like big and famous and official and well-funded alternative.
Yes.
And the employees have badges that say Time Warner.
Yep.
And, that kind of thing, right?
Yep, definitely. It's a good way to tell the difference, actually.
Yeah, it is. And, it's time that people kind of, clean up their third eye or something, but they start to pay more attention to the fact that the crime syndicates that set things up, not only do they set up storyline A, they set up B, C, D too.
Yep.
And so they, the famous quote from Vladimir Lenin about the best way to control the opposition is to lead it, right? Yep. And you want to start an opposition if there isn't one. And so, if I were planning something like 9/11, I would immediately say, well, I'm going to start a group called Airline Pilots for 9/11 Truth. And I'm going to start a group called Architects for 9/11 Truth. I'm going to, everything, right?
Oh, yeah.
Airline flight attendant.
You find out which pilots know the truth and which architects know the truth.
Right. And,
cleaner operation.
Right. Now, this is not, I'm not like casting aspersions on any particular individuals. I'm just saying that's how I do it.
Yeah, sure. Of course.
And so.
Go ahead.
Mm-hmm. No, go ahead.
No, go ahead.
Oh,
I want to hear
okay. Well, I'll tell you what then. So let's how about I give you a thought experiment? What if in the entertainment business you knew somebody and he had a macho personality, practically Texan, shall we say. And, you'd hear him now and then because he had a radio show and whatever, and he'd say how he's taking his family out to steak dinners regularly and enjoys barbecues and even goes hunting for deer, right?
Yep.
And then somebody told you, hey, by the way, did you know his wife was high up in PETA, the radical animal rights group? Would you find that kind of interesting?
I would find it somewhat contradictory, and I would think there'd be a lot of fights at home.
Right. I would start to ask some questions, and then if somebody oh, by the way, her father was in the Foreign Service. He was high up in the U.S. government in that kind of nexus where you don't know exactly who's working for whom doing what, right?
Mm-hmm.
And then by accident one day you might hear him on an interview, because he gets interviewed himself, and then he says, yeah, at family get-togethers, basically half the people are working for something like the CIA, NSA, or DIA, or whatever, right?
Yeah, that
Well,
would be bad.
wouldn't that be kind of interesting, and wouldn't you start to wonder a little bit at this point? Like,
yes, I would, actually, since
yeah,
I know hardly anybody in my family is in the CIA, FBI, NSA, and NASA, or any of that. Yeah.
and that kind of complex. But nonetheless, this is like somebody who's got a kind of alternative personality, so to speak, right? I mean, you're looking at that and you start to wonder, and then you look into it a little bit, and now and then you hear him, and then you find out from people who worked with him or his friends or whatever, and they all say, well, him on the radio or TV, that's all an act. That's a persona, right? He's totally different. He's tremendously funny. He might have more fans. More people would support him if he would be himself. Wouldn't you find this rather interesting at this point?
Yeah, that would be.
Yeah. So what do you think? Isn't this kind of interesting? I mean, there are people out there who kind of ask questions, and they say things like, they offer $10,000 for his high school yearbook, right?
Really?
Because nobody can seem to find certain things. You know what I mean? What do you think? Are we spinning our wheels, wasting our time, or are we just wondering why people have Time Warner alternatives?
Well, I mean, they set up these guys, and then we have to recognize who is who. They usually pick somebody who's got a lot of talent, so it can overwhelm everybody else who's actually trying to tell the truth but hasn't have the background. They'd also be looking for someone who has a background in performance and maybe even television, because that's the art form. So you'd have to be somebody who had some experience. It couldn't just be a rank amateur. It just wouldn't work out that way. Like Gloria Steinem has admitted that she worked for the CIA in the early 60s and that they taught her all her journalism skills. So, there's a background. People just don't emerge instantaneously as heroes. There's always a background, And
so you mean like 19-year-old superheroes that challenge the system and become super famous are kind of rare?
Yeah, very rare. Yeah, and they won't let you in anyway. I mean, if you're on a national TV or radio, and you've got 150 stations or 200 stations, you're a marked man. You've already done something to get into the game. Otherwise, you couldn't do it. There's no way that I could do it. There's no way you could do it. No way. It's not the way it works. If you're up there, then you've already agreed to a set of rules that you will not break. And you can watch, the highest alternative guy. You can watch him and see he carefully never breaks the rules. It's always very carefully contrived message. And you see that's how you can tell who's who, actually. And that's what we have to learn right now in the awakening, is this discernment. Who is really who? And, are they independent? Do they have an independent company like I do with my company? Is it completely financed by them? Or
hey, I got a question for you, Jay.
Yeah.
If somebody works with you or works for you briefly, do they have to sign an NDA that's like more severe than people working on classified projects for the military?
I don't even ask people to sign NDAs. If you're going to lie about me or talk about me behind my back, I'm going to fire your ass.
Well, I just think it's kind of interesting to have people who are, let's say, alternative types, who, talk about freedom and, information and so on and so forth, and they're more secretive than our Langley friends.
Yeah, that's what you have to look for. And, again, if they're high up on the ladder in the food chain, you can bet they've already signed and agreed to a certain set of principles. Otherwise, these syndicate mafias that we're talking about will come after you. Another thing that can happen is that you can be legit. You can think, I'm going to go out and tell the world what's really going on. And you go out there and you tell the world what's really going on, and then one night you've had too much to drink or whatever, and you come back to the motel room, and there's a girl who is a rookie groupie, and you take her in, and it turns out she's only 15 years old, and there's video, and
of course,
pretty soon you're completely compromised, and because you were drinking way too much before you were doing your performance art, and that could be really a great way to be brought in, easily brought in. You could have even 4 or 5 of these incidences, which would really destroy your life. And so, you'd have to look in the past for a performance artist that was maybe, getting a little bit too inebriated on stage, and maybe you could find out, how he got compromised at that point.
Well, that we might never know. But on the other hand, we could look for similar characteristics, right? If somebody is funny, or somebody is can rant on demand, I guess you might say.
Yeah, you learn, that's how I got so good. I was on the radio for years up in Seattle. I just got, every day I was on the radio, every day on the radio. Pretty soon you just get really good at it. And, I'm not a funny guy. I was never trying to be a funny guy. I'm just a guy trying to tell people what I think is going on. But it's really there in the act of repeating it every day that you become good. So a guy like a guy coming up, starting out on his own, is going to have a lot more trouble getting in. But again, if you're taken in and you're on hundreds and hundreds of TV stations or radio stations, or if everybody in all the newspapers print your columns and all of that, you're already taken. So I don't even have to look at that point. You're already taken. Now, if you're big on the internet and not on broadcast, that's different, at least for now. They haven't squashed that one yet. But if you're big in broadcast, all broadcast, and you know this, I know you know this, every single broadcasting is controlled by the mob. That was one of the first things they took over, to make sure that they could control any news about themselves. So, no. Sorry. If you're on more than 5 stations, you're compromised, period.
Yeah, and then back to our macho persona guy. What if you just superficially looked into him and they said, well, he's 40 years old, but looks 53 or something like that. Right?
Yeah, I noticed that.
And, he's totally different when he's in his studio, because he's got makeup and his hair is dyed and like blue contact lenses.
Way to hide that. There's no way to hide your age like that. Forget it. No way.
But when you're out and about, like, going somewhere, you look 54 or more. And, anyway, there's just a whole number of things. Like if you talk about stories like you got arrested protesting this, that, and the other, but, arrest records are public records in a lot of places. You know what I mean? If people have trouble finding them, it makes you wonder, doesn't it?
Well, if you don't have, if they can't find your yearbook and they can't find arrest records, and there's something wrong, for sure. And I mean, you should be able to find the yearbook from the school, but apparently there's no pictures in the yearbook or something. I don't know. But for sure, the resemblances between the comedian Bill Hicks and Alex Jones cannot be denied. I mean, he looks like Bill Hicks would look when he's in his 50s. So got same manager from the same town. I mean, come on. Certain point, the coincidence, cosmic.
Well, they have the same thread.
And Alex Jones picked up an award for Bill Hicks. What's up
I know.
with that? I mean, come on. It's right there on YouTube. It's like,
they have the same limp, which is not exactly a normal thing.
Same mold.
Same moles on the face, on the neck.
And let's face it.
Teeth. When in the rare cases where they don't have like the teeth, whatever you call them, the things that, change the appearance of them, when you get the actual photos of the real ones, right. Particularly the bottom palette is unusual and is a match. So I think you're talking about a very unusual combination that you would have both the upper and lower palettes match.
The real
thing we're talking seriously unlikely here is what I'm trying to say.
Yeah, I mean it could be just a most amazing coincidence that this producer in Austin, Texas, has two guys that almost look exactly alike, that both are talking about the same exact things, that one dies and the other emerges within a year of each other, talking about the same exact subject, and then he's got the same number of letters in their name. And it's just one giant coincidence. That's all. It's just amazing how many coincidences there are. People call me a conspiracy theorist, and I say that's great. You can call me a conspiracy theorist, but that means I get to call you a coincidence theorist. That's kind of how I feel about this.
Well, I got a question for you. When did you first come to that view? Because I'd heard this theory, I don't know, at least 7 years ago or so, and maybe 10. And I looked into it every 2 or 3 years. And I don't know, 5 years ago or so, I still thought it was not probable. Possible, but not probable. But after that, it started to become just like too overwhelming, too many photos, too many things. What about you? When did you?
Same here. Finally, I saw a documentary on Netflix about Bill Hicks.
Uh-huh.
And, I was like having trouble with the changes in the voice. Didn't sound at all like. And but there was at one point in the doc where Bill Hicks completely loses it and starts screaming. And in that moment, in that brief 15 seconds, 10 seconds that there are in that doc, freeze it, go up and down, reverse, forward, reverse, just keep doing it. And you can see he's right there. The persona was being developed right there. And, and I believe steroids finished off his voice and turned it into what it became, because it sounds like a guy who took a lot of steroids.
Yeah, it does, although they do have surgery, and both Hicks and Jones have been chain smokers, and so you're talking about, Hicks was famous for his 2 lighter a day habit, right? So we're talking about some heavy-duty smoking. But I think it's a voice. It's just a persona. I happened to recently listen to a show of professional comics.
Yeah.
And it's the first time I ever heard it. I didn't really know them. I'm not that much into comics. But anyway, it was basically 2 or 3 professional comics. I mean, that's what they do for a living. And then maybe 1 or 2 producers. Anyway, I don't, whatever the numbers were, 4 or 5 people. And that was the theme. The theme is did Hicks become Jones? And the answer at the end of the show.
Hear that. Can you send me that link?
I will look for it if I can. It was random, you know how the internet can be. But I will look.
Okay. Yeah.
But I think I can find it. I think I can, as long as Mozilla remembers. You put something at the top.
Yep.
And anyway, the conclusion was, I think all of them except one basically said, yeah, I think that's what happened. And then one just said, well, we need more forensic evidence. It's possible, but I don't know. I thought the reason I thought that was important is because these are professional comics. Okay, so they have an idea of what a professional can do, right?
Oh yeah.
If you and I talked about something like basketball or football, and you said, can a quarterback throw the football some distance and hit a football on the ground, right, with no pressure or attacking him, right? I don't know if he can do that from 30 yards away or 50. I don't really know at what point they lose accuracy, right? I don't know. I'm not in that game. I don't really pay attention. But a professional quarterback would know. Okay, they could say
Agreed. Yeah,
that the top 10 quarterbacks can do X, Y, and Z. Yep. They're going to know. It's their game. That's, they spend night and day studying this stuff. And so they know how much, can you keep a voice like this? Can you do a rant like that? Can you, they're going to know. Yep. And so anyway, the conclusion, as I say, all except one of them was basically that they thought that is indeed likely what happened.
Yeah, I think the walls are closing in on him. Another thing that needs to be pointed out is that comedians, outside of seriously funny guys who actually just repeat themselves, like Rodney Dangerfield, most comedians have an arc, and they start out young and they're funny and they go, and then in their mid-30s, maybe their 40s, they begin to tire of the whole thing, telling the same jokes every night, goes town to town. And so Tom Hanks, who was a stand-up comedian, became an actor. Robin Williams, who was a stand-up comedian, he became an actor earlier, but then after his stage show kind of tired out, he became, pretty much a full-time actor, and amazingly hardly ever made a good film. And on and on, we see this all the time. This is the steady evolution of comedians looking to find a new career after the first 20 or so years of telling the same stale jokes over and over. And I think that is exactly what happened here, is that, he realized that just standing up there and making fun and all that just wasn't working. He wasn't making any progress, and he needed a new change. And so he changed from kind of a hippie stand-up comedian to a macho Texan who's going to lead the revolution. Whether he got compromised or not, I don't know, but it could be. I don't know. I mean, there's been many attempts to compromise me, so I know that they're always trying. And I don't know. I really don't. I don't know.
There's another
what I see.
There's another thing that these comics pointed out. They discussed this. They said almost, the vast majority of comics try to switch.
Yep.
Become actors, producers, whatever,
yep.
Right?
Writers, all sorts of stuff.
Writers. But the additional factor was that the travel can become really painful.
Yeah.
And Hicks himself made constant jokes about that.
He did.
Just does,
how tired he was of it.
Tired of staying in econo lodges and things like that. And I can imagine that would be a real drag.
Oh, God.
And so you factor that in. That's another incentive. And then his producer, they said that the last project Hicks was working on was an evil Rush Limbaugh character, right? And well, okay.
Really? I did not know that.
And then that producer,
I didn't know that.
Yes, that was the last project that Hicks was working on, was an evil Rush Limbaugh. And then you factor in that. His producer has said that he got all these comments from fans of Hicks, and they say, we just loved Hicks, but, this Jones, Jesus, this is terrible. How can you be doing that? And his response was, they just don't get it. Okay? Right. And my interpretation of that, see if it's yours, but my interpretation of that is what you're not getting is that this act actually discredits, the constitutional patriot types.
Absolutely.
And so when you have a rant,
look at his performance on the not Larry King, the guy who took over for
Piers
Larry
Morgan.
King. Yeah, look at his performance.
Piers Morgan.
Right? You think that helped us? Do you think that helped us?
No, that hurt us.
That was more bombs thrown at us than anybody has ever done.
Right, that was a terrible thing. And
TV,
if you think,
but he didn't.
Jay, the producer for that, I think, or I forget they have different titles in the business, you would know, but I think it was the producer, had a tweet on Twitter where he basically said that at the end of that, when they cut away or the broadcast time was over, they told Jones, they said, we're no longer broadcasting, we're off the air, or whatever the terms are. And Jones immediately just totally changed personalities as if nothing was happening. It had nothing to do. There was no true emotion involved. It was all an act. And that's what the guy said on on Twitter. He says it's just all an act. It's not. It had nothing to do with him. It's just an act. Well,
I believe it.
But that's really, really bad, because it's one thing to say, I forgive him because he gets so emotional over the issue. But now we're just saying that it's actually, he wasn't emotional over the issue. It's a job. It's a rant on demand.
It looked like it.
And
I'll tell you that. It looked totally contrived to me. As a director of actors, I can tell you that looked contrived.
And you've seen other ones, like on 9/11, the day of 9/11, he's like crying, wailing, the end of the world is at hand. And then it's like, oh shit, we've only got 10 seconds to the break, and, calls the producer or whatever, in a totally normal voice, right?
Yeah. Yep.
It just totally breaks from the character. Well, they pulled that from, the archives and YouTube and everything, but if you look around, you can find it. And
right.
There's actually something else, Jay, I found that I thought was interesting was, you can find Hicks's last performance. There's you can buy it, right? But the one you can't find is the one before that. And somebody in the audience released a bit where Hicks goes and says, essentially these corporate whores will do anything, right? Right? I didn't realize how easy it was to take advantage of them. I should have done it more. And so I got this project coming, and so I asked him for some money. Bam, there comes the check. I'm out, and then he stopped. And it's like, did he just say, I'm Al, what? I don't know. That's not proof, but yeah, I don't know.
Wow.
But, because I while I'm giving him a hard time here, we're kind of bad-mouthing him. I actually don't. I see it more in the opportunistically compromised as opposed to totally evil side of things. And
well, I do, because I know show business. I know these comedians have a really hard time changing careers, and there was no way Bill Hicks was going to get an acting career. So he had to create a new persona, and had to be a persona that used his previous work in some way. And that's exactly what's going on.
Yeah, and for those interested, if you look on the internet, I think you will find photo comparisons, all kinds of basically forensic type details, statements from friends, producers, employees, whatever. And I think it's a hell of a legal case. There is no smoking gun, but as you said, if you got 20 coincidences, I mean, that's awfully more than would be expected.
It's like you hear the neighbor couple fighting, it's 2 a.m. or there's a gunshot from the house. At 3:30, you see the guy loading something really heavy into the trunk of his car and driving away. Then the next day you ask him where his wife is. Oh, she left in the middle of the night unexpectedly. No, you don't have any smoking gun, but you got so much evidence that this guy killed his wife. It's not even funny. And we have the same thing here with this. I don't know if it's true or not. If it is true, then I think we need to get to the bottom of it and find out why. If it's just him changing careers, then he has to come forth and say that. There's got to be honesty in this movement. The fact that he's not being honest with this is possibly not being honest with this is a cause for concern, because he's acting as a leader of the whole movement, and we got to find out the truth.
Have you seen the Illuminati card game that has a card that looks like him, and it's called Agent in Place?
No.
Yeah, you remember the famous Illuminati cards. They had so many that came to pass. Well, one of them, and by the way, that company was in Austin, Texas.
Really?
Steven Jackson's games. And they were raided by the feds when it came out. And, and it's not totally clear, but maybe one of Jones's graphic artists worked for that company. But that's not, you're in the production business, so you understand that you've got all kinds of freelancers, and a good artist is going to work at a bunch of places. So I'm not going to say that's proof of anything. But on the other hand, that Agent in Place card, if you search on the internet for Illuminati card Agent in Place, I think you'll likely come to the conclusion, oh, well, I know who that is.
Well,
that's
they have
20
to tell
pounds
you that's
lighter.
rules.
Yeah, so that's the other thing. Anyone
they
can
like
go
to.
look it up on the internet right now.
I
So
will.
I'm
I'll
just
look
going
it
to
up.
say that you just have so many things, like even just dying in Arkansas, supposedly of pancreatic cancer, which, by the way, is incredibly rare under the age of 35. I mean, you might as well be saying that, somebody at 10 years old died of Alzheimer's or something. I mean, this is like something you'd never hear of. And many say that he got chemotherapy. But hey, in all of his shows, he's got his beard and his hair. I never heard of people going through chemotherapy that keep their beard and hair.
Well, he went
And
completely silent.
Arkansas, by the way, has special
didn't he go
laws
completely silent?
keep death records.
Oh, really?
Well, I don't remember the exact details, the last 3 months or something. But if you're going through chemo, it's going to be more than 3 months.
Yeah.
And anyway, that's just one more item to add to it, right? I'm not saying that dying in Arkansas proves anything, but it is a state with special rules that keep all records for death secret for 50 years. So you can't you can't 20 years later say, oh, he died in a car wreck, and you thought he died of cancer or something. That you won't get access for 50 years. And the point, though, is that means you can't even request them, right? So if there are no death records, you won't be able to get any answers for 50 years. So I don't know. You just add it all up, and I start to smell a rat. Or perhaps a better term is more like a compromised case of a guy who, like you're saying, is in a position that's not sustainable, and there's an opportunity to get out.
Well, the real point of the matter is that they look so much alike, it's ridiculous.
Yes, indeed. Well, I tell you what, why don't we move on?
Same producer. Okay, go for it.
Yeah. No, I know. People just have to think about it. Look at some of the websites like Mac Quigley or Atlantean Conspiracy. Anyway, just do a search on some of these things, and you'll just seriously, there are like 20 things that you're just not going to be able to explain away. You could explain away one, right? Maybe two, right? Okay, the same kind of limp.
There's one thing that cannot be explained, and that is, why is Alex Jones picking up Bill Hicks Award?
To mock us.
That's like
lately
me accepting an award for you. That's like me accepting an award for you. It doesn't make one tiny, even little bit of sense. It's like calling in, the neighbor to get an award for me. I mean, it's like, what?
It's so absurd. You'd think they would at least have brought in his sister or something. You know what I mean? Right? I mean, that's just so ridiculous. How?
No,
well, that's my point. I think that if you listen to Jones's show in the last year or two, they've had several times where I think they mock us over the Bill Hicks thing. And there's one recently where he says, okay, you've cornered me. Yes, I was Bill Hicks, but you don't know the half of it. I'm this elite Englishman, right? Something mental, son, as in you have a mental disease for thinking this, right? And the whole thing, it's very well done. I mean, he's great. But some of the listeners might not realize this, but I remember when Jones came out or was early on the scene, and he didn't have this tremendous voice play ability and comic sense. Okay? He was the fighter against the New World Order. The guy who was going to go get arrested for us, right? So he was the information side of the militia fringe more than anything else. And now you see him talking about things, and then he just slips up and says, I respect somebody who's, good at something. If anybody is a better comic than I am, I totally respect that. Right? And it's oh, Alex, you're a comic. That's what you think of yourself as, right? You know what? You're slipping up here. You're telling us the truth. And anyway, you see that, and you just have to say that this is just they're like 20 things. And as I say, you can handle one or two, but you just can't handle 20. It's just absolutely over the top. And then all these things like mocking us. That just, again, they look down on us. They're smart, rich, intelligent, and connected to the intelligence agencies. and they just treat us like the cattle. So anyway, I just think people should look into it.
What's funny about this is that I never really thought Bill Hicks was all that funny. I mean, I thought he was telling the truth and it was refreshing, but I never found myself like laughing, overwhelming at what he said. Not like Rodney Dangerfield, who would make my gut would split open when he'd start cracking jokes. But I never thought that Bill Hicks was a real funny guy. I mean, I appreciated what he was doing, but a lot of his stuff fell flat for me. I'm just saying, just for me. So a lot of the people that are going to start screaming at, we're talking about this great comedian and all that, I'm coming from a place where I'm not even sure he was all that great a comedian. I think he's just a guy trying to get the truth out. And he used comedy as his vehicle.
I thought he had a tremendous amount of truth or interesting thoughts. And I thought, though, he did have one thing that you don't always see. It wasn't always – he had a really ruthless wit. He could just destroy people. And
he could do
that. I think that was under control. But you can see it with Jones. Like when 5 years ago, he just did the greatest destructive act on Sarah Palin imaginable. At the end of it, I don't see how anyone who could remotely support her. I mean, he just tore her to shreds. Absolutely tore her to total shreds. And of course, recently he's come out and praised her. She'd be a really good vice president, and if she were slightly smarter, she'd be a good president. Right? You just put these two together, 5 years ago and today, and you'd look at it and you'd say, "Oh my God, they've got him by the short hairs." Right? He's totally lost any semblance of freedom. But my point, though, is you saw that thing from 5 years ago, and you would say, "Oh, this guy is just ruthless." I mean, he'd be just a tremendous debater at Oxford or something. And anyway, my point, though, is he's changed over the years. His persona went from this, fighter for the go get arrested to not get thumb scanned and stuff like that, to now you see regularly on his show him doing faces, acts, voices, all kinds of stuff, which I think is more the real him.
Running out of material. Yeah, I agree. He's running out of material. The old persona couldn't take it that far, and he will start resorting to old programming for sure.
And I wouldn't be surprised if it turns into Patriot Comics. Patriot show is going to be half comedy, which, hey, that's interesting. But that, again, will prove our point, is that this awakening you're talking about, we need to look into these things. And I wanted to move on a bit to I heard you talking about some of the work of Miles Mathis. And there's a lot to look into for people out there. But for today, why don't we start with the question of John Lennon? I know this is a quick change of topics here, but I think it's important that when you talk about an awakening, part of it means that you accepted the storyline A or B or C that you were given, when actually it might have been D that was the truth in the past. And so why don't we get to John Lennon and the question, we were basically told that he was gunned down, and you look into it and you say, oh, it's a CIA patsy, there's a CIA guy handler there, and so Lennon was, against Reagan's wars in Central America, so they gunned him down, right? Yep. That's kind of like the storyline B for those of us with suspicious minds. But the thing is, it's a lie. It's not actually what happened. Jay, you want to give us your take on that?
Well, I'll give you what I know and then what Miles Mathis has come up with. First off, about 2 years ago, Lennon's producer told the world that he was making a documentary about the last days of Lennon, in which he was going to reveal that Lennon had turned into a right-wing Republican and that he supported Reagan, and that he was disavowing all of his former leftist Marxist statements. And actually, if you listen to the song Revolution, which is written by John Lennon, you can see that there are the inklings of a right-winger in those lyrics. And so I don't know if that's true. I suspect it is. And I suspect that Lennon, and I have other evidence to support this, Lennon began realizing that he was not an independent rock star at all, that, in fact, he was a victim of mind control and of Tavistock, and that the Beatles were a manufactured band. And Ringo, I don't even think, played on the first album, Meet the Beatles. It doesn't sound like Ringo at all. It sounds like a really crappy jazz session drummer. And when you start putting it all together, you realize they're probably not even playing most of their instruments. Did they even write their own songs? Lennon can't remember writing Strawberry Fields Forever, for instance. And so you start putting it together and you begin realizing that Lennon started realizing, I believe, in the mid-'70s that, in fact, the Beatles were a manufactured thing and that Epstein was the center of that manufactured process. And he began realizing that there were forces that were controlling the culture that were not all that healthy. And did he become a right-winger in reaction to that because he realized a lot of these forces were coming from the left? Could be, and still naive and maybe still making mistakes. But at one point, according to Miles Mathis, he began to realize that he had to get out from under what was happening, and he decided to fake his death. And Miles presents some pretty compelling evidence that John Lennon is alive and living in Michigan under the name of Mark Strecker, and even occasionally going out and doing performances of Lennon. He's a Lennon impersonator, but he's the only impersonator that actually looks and the same age and actually looks exactly like John Lennon. Even has this crooked hook nose that Lennon had. And
he sounds exactly like.
Sounds exactly, and he's telling stories on stage which, don't sound made up. They sound like somebody actually remembering an incident. And I would be interesting to see where Mark Strecker is now after Mathis's expose came out. But you start looking and you're realizing kind of the high strangeness around Mark David Chapman, and then we find out that the only witness to the murder was the doorman at the Dakota Apartments, and then we find out, 25 years later, that this doorman is actually one of the anti-Castro Cubans involved in the Kennedy assassination. And so we realize that we've got probably a CIA guy at the door, which wouldn't surprise me at all anyway. And he's the only witness. Yoko, surprisingly, never turns around once, even though there's like 7 shots fired out. She claims she never turned around once to see what was happening, so she never actually saw Chapman shooting Lennon. And then, the whole thing begins to you really begin to wonder what's going on. And, I can't say that John Lennon faked his death. I don't know. I just know there's so many high strangeness around his murder, supposed murder, and the emergence of this Mark Strecker that you just have to wonder if Lennon just got tired of it all and threw it up, went into the woods of Michigan. And, I wouldn't want to be in that limelight.
Right. And lots of famous people fake their deaths. And this is a long topic we could get into. It would probably be too much for people. But how about a few other things, which the paper by Miles Mathis goes into? There's a photo with Lennon and Chapman with that CIA doorman laughing right next to them, right behind them. The final album, which was called Double Fantasy, has various lyrics in there that kind of imply that, this is, time for a change and a new life and so on and so forth. And
it'll be
in that
starting over.
It'll be like starting over. And there are a lot of reasons that are complicated to go into, like court cases and other things that I think make a circumstantial case that Lennon lived. And
I agree.
That impersonator, there was a movie made, one of these documentaries called Let Him Be, where he's the star. Somebody is trying to chase down the elusive John Lennon who staged his death, and he's living as an impersonator. And the main actor is this character who I think is likely John Lennon himself. And anyway, it goes on, and there's some new songs in there that I think are quite revealing and interesting. And I recommend people look into that. But in addition to that, you can find this Lennon impersonator talking, and then you can hear him kind of talking during his act, right? And to my mind, his American accents are very good, but not okay. Okay?
Agreed.
98%, but not 100%. And he's got 2 different ones that don't work together. He's got a like a Midwestern one, but not like he's from Michigan in my mind at all. And then there's like a more drawly one, which is in a different pitch. And anyway, I don't know how to say it, but it'd be kind of like if you heard somebody mixing Texas and Virginia or something, and you just kind of, there's something not quite working for that. It's talented and experienced, but I don't buy it.
I don't either, actually.
Jay, are you there?
But it's when the guy does yes, can you hear me?
Yes.
It's also when he does his Liverpudlian accents on stage that are really convincing, because that's not easy to do.
Right. And in addition to that, this John Lennon impersonator, there are several things that are quite interesting. First of all, he's got people who like him, like George Harrison's sister, right? And you sit there and say, you must be quite an impersonator if you get, like people like Harrison's sister to pay attention to you. And then in this documentary, they have his studio, and it's like got, $100,000 worth of equipment, basically from the 1980s, right? And you sit there and say, not too many impersonators have that. But here's the kicker for a lot of people. He has a Beatles paraphernalia collection. Things like, their first gold records signed by all four Beatles. He has, all kinds of things signed by all of them and whatever. And you're sitting there saying, look, now we're talking hundreds of thousands of dollars worth of paraphernalia here, right? I didn't know that being a Lennon impersonator was such a lucrative field. I missed my calling in life. I should have, wait a minute here. And he's given, it seems, all kinds of stuff to a museum or whatever, not too far away from this place, Traverse City, Michigan. Anyway, it raises all kinds of questions, to put it mildly. And I think if you listen to what you can see in this video, which, by the way, was suppressed. It came out and immediately became unavailable.
Totally, you cannot find it hardly. It's very, very suppressed. It's impossible to find almost. Miles Mathis has a link to it, and I suggest you watch it, because why would they suppress it? This should have been a hit. And then think about the title, Leave Him Be.
Let Him Be, I think it was, unless I'm wrong. But,
Let Him Be,
but in any case...
So they're saying that...
Yeah. But the other thing is, for those of us into, looking into the intelligence world, that's just so perfect, because that's how this is like a psyop mind screw. You know what I mean? They're playing with you. They're mocking you, like the thing with Jones and Hicks, right? They're sitting there. They're putting this out, and it's true. And they're saying, we can do anything, right? We have this whole game locked up. What are you going to do about it? And then they suppress it, and you can't even talk about it, because they're going to mock you and say, oh, you're just a crazy person. There was a movie like that. It's perfect. It's totally psychological warfare at its finest. And the paper by Miles Mathis gets into something else, which I think is related, and that's quite important, which is a figure named Major John Pepper. Jay, do you remember anything about him?
A little bit. Why don't you enlighten me a little bit here, and I'll start remembering.
Well, he was in charge of, the BSC. He was like the British intelligence guy in charge of America. And for all cultural type things. His group, though, was not just America, but they brought us things like Ian Fleming and the creator of Doctor Who and Roald Dahl, and the list goes on and on. David Ogilvy, the marketing, figure. This guy may have been Sergeant Pepper of the band, because he started this organization in 1947, which, again, in that famous Beatles lyric in 1967, it was 20 years ago today. And on the album cover, almost everybody in there was basically related to this fellow, if they hadn't died before he became quite so important, right? And anyway, you can make a strong case that this is one of the most important intelligence guys in the last 100 years. And he's been really scrubbed from the history books. And it raises questions. And this paper speculates, and I think makes a reasonable case, that the reason is because they put his name on that Beatles album. And that makes it so visible they kind of have to hide it. But anyway, it's called the BSC, and it was very, very important. Everybody knows about MI6 or whatever. But it was like Britain's way of controlling the U.S. And let's face it, that's like totally important for them.
Well,
right? I mean, you can't even separate British intelligence. Exactly.
Exactly, I agree.
So,
yeah, no, it was an intel operation for sure. Mathis proves that. And yeah, Sergeant Pepper, I remember him now, John Pepper. Yeah, that's probably exactly right. And all those people on Sergeant Pepper's album on the front cover were probably all of Pepper's little agents. From Aleister Crowley to Marilyn Monroe, all of them. Including the
long
Beatles.
list. And now we get back to the Beatles. Brian Epstein, Intel guy, British Intel, right?
Yes.
The more you look into the Beatles, the more it just feels like one big British intelligence operation. And that doesn't mean they had no talent. It doesn't mean that the British invasion was a terrible thing. It just means that you need to be realistic, that they had a project to culturally, emotionally, whatever, psychically, I guess you might say, control the U.S. And this Major John Pepper was the leader of the group with that responsibility. And that may well have been Sergeant Pepper.
Well, it probably
and
was.
People don't want to hear it, I suppose. But in the theme of this awakening that we're trying to experience, I think that's the thing, is that we got to look back at the past and see that a lot of things were not what we thought. Okay? John Lennon was not going to be shot because he didn't like Ronald Reagan. Okay? They weren't going to do. He's one of them. He's in their network. So anyway, we gotta revisit some of these things, and I've heard you talk about that. You want to talk about this a bit? Shouldn't we be revisiting things like the Sharon Tate thing or some of these serial killers? I mean, you have cases like the victims they have names like Peter Pan, right? Or some surname that's never been seen before or since.
Or how about a name like Dylan Storm Roof for a right-wing crazy guy? And how about there's only one other Dylan Storm Roof in the entire country, and he lives in the same town as the racist assassin in Charleston. Only he doesn't have two N's at the end of his name, and Dylan. There's only two, and they live within a few blocks of each other. And then, the Storm Front is the name for right-wingers, and his middle name is Storm. How many people have a middle name like Storm? And begin looking at it, you see they're constantly trying to screw with your head and mind screw you. We now know that a lot of the events are contrived, and so we have to start going backwards and seeing, did they just start contriving events with 9/11 or Sandy Hook or whatever? And the answer is hell no. They were contriving events all along. They were creating a new culture by contriving events. I believe that the Sharon Tate murders, I think Miles Mathis has shown beyond any shadow of a doubt. I've never seen such a bogus thing in my entire life. They can't even keep the same people straight. Again, you have intel all over it. Again, you have major cultural influences and the weird coincidences between the Sharon Tate murder and the John Lennon murder. Roman Polanski, Sharon Tate's husband, shot Rosemary's Baby in 1967, and then in, I think it was 70 or 71, when John Lennon was looking for apartments in New York, and he found out that this apartment he was looking at was the set for Rosemary's Baby, he immediately bought it. And then he's murdered in front of that same building where Rosemary has the devil baby in Roman Polanski's film. And then the supposed murderers of Sharon Tate and her crew were the leader said he was being influenced by the Beatles lyrics to do this, and you start looking at all the threads that run through the thing that connect everybody to everybody, And actually, Peter Levenda goes into this in his book Sinister Forces, but he isn't connecting it. He's just showing you how all these weird things are going on, but not really realizing that the whole thing's being orchestrated by somebody who's putting it all together and kind of almost mocking and ridiculing all of the people that are looking and saying, see, you can't figure out what's going on here, can you? And then you have Vincent Bugliosi, who wrote the ultimate book on Manson, Helter Skelter. Well, he writes a book about the Kennedy assassination, which is so ridiculous, so fraudulent. You just have to wonder who this guy is, too. And I believe that he's one of them. He knows exactly what's going on. And a lot of things are going on like that. Once we realize that this whole thing is just a big orchestra conducted by some conductor that we can't see, then we begin to understand that events going back even to the Kennedy assassination and before have a layer of contrivance about it, and we have to start coming to grips with that. And I think there's a great liberation in that we can see these events, and then we're liberated from the past. We no longer have to live with the pain of what we thought was real when we now know it wasn't, and maybe a little anger might come forth when you realize how you've been fooled. But don't get mad at us because we're trying to pull the wool out from over your eyes. We're just trying to do our job. It's going to be awakening is painful when you realize that your favorite pop band is really a CIA group, and your favorite actor is actually working for an Intel, and your favorite songwriter is a total fraud and didn't write anything that he purports to have written, and he's also part of a gigantic corporation, and your favorite anti-government, anti-New World Order guy is also a creation. This is good. This is liberating. And we need to then realize, okay, if it's supported by major corporations, if it's supported by broadcast entities and by movie entities and all that, it's probably not real, and it's probably contrived. And maybe that will change soon, but for right now, I think we can use that as a rule.
Oh, absolutely. I think that the point is, a lot of people, a lot of listeners are going to say, I get it. Sandy Hook and the Boston bombing were total hoaxes. Yes. But what's important to realize is those who protect the official story in any way are likely doing it because they are pressured to, right? They're not being honest about it. The evidence is overwhelming. But the bigger point that you're getting into there is it didn't start at Sandy Hook. Okay, there are now on the internet people posting stuff from the Oklahoma City bombing or the Atlanta Olympic bombing, all kinds of things, where you can basically see crisis actors at work. Okay, this doesn't mean that nobody was killed at Oklahoma City. That's not what I'm saying. That's not the point. The point is that they need good pictures for the cover of Time magazine. They need the right kind of victim. They need the right storyline. They need a white fireman holding a dead black baby, or whatever it is they need. Okay, whatever the storyline is, they want it, and they're going to get it. And so this has been going on a long, long time, and you see, once you can accept that, then your work with Kubrick, right, on Apollo, is less of a total mind shock to people.
I think actually that was the first kind of one of the opening rounds. I think that if it hadn't been for the Kubrick, I think it would have been less likely that the Sandy Hook would have been discovered so quickly. But I think people were they're getting hip to the tricks. And I'm not alone. I'm not saying that I put forth it all. A lot of filmmakers have been coming forth and showing the tricks of the trade. And I think that that in itself enlightened enough people to notice that there were crisis actors and things should not have gone the way they did. And then they really blew it a few months later when they did the Boston bombing. And everything there was so contrived, so pathetically done, and out in the open in front of cameras that they just didn't realize what had happened. And there's been a change in tide. People are becoming more aware, and they're becoming more discerning, and they're becoming aware that they're of cinema and the techniques. And I'm going to do everything I can to make sure that I can inform as many people about these things, so that when they see an event happening, they can tell what is real and what isn't. Now they're getting good, and they weren't expecting that what happened after Sandy Hook. I guarantee they were not expecting the come down from the awakened community as fast as it did. And they were reeling, but they're still doing their contrivances, so we've still got to be aware of that and keep watching.
Well, why don't we wrap it up on that by having you let us know your website and then your new movie again?
Yeah, my websites are, if you want to see my new movie, which is about what we've been talking about in a lot of ways, you can see the trailer at thelastavatarmovie.com. You can watch it immediately at watch.thelastavatarmovie.com. And if you want to see my other films and other stuff, it's sacredmysteries.com, and then all my free stuff, my wacky articles and investigations and things are at my name, Weidner, WEIDNER.com, and you can pick up my stuff or contact me through there.
Okay, sounds good. We appreciate you coming, and keep up the good work.
Hey, man, thanks for having me. I really appreciate it.
Paul again. Sorry that we had a few delays in Skype that caused some pauses and me talking over Jay, things like that. My apologies to you, the audience, and to Jay. Anyway, thanks again. Take care. That's it, folks. Yeah. It's a wrap.